Hello, boys and girls, ladies and gents. This is DafubFilm&TV, and I have just watched through once and then partially watched through a second time the most recent slash newest episode, that is episode 8 of Ahsoka. So, without further ado, I shall now give you my immediate, as it were, off the cuff stream of consciousness opinion slash review on it, and then you can agree or disagree with me in the comments below. Ugh. Frankly, Secret Invasion again would have offended me more. This is the MCU show that was on Disney Plus prior to this. Would have offended me more if I'd actually been a Marvel Comics reader and had read through the Secret Invasion story run, which I believe is considered to be one of the best plot lines to be seen in the Marvel Avengers comics. Apparently, it was a relatively longish run, very well written, considered one of the best stories from the comic books. But I haven't. Again, I didn't read it, so I was not so much offended or annoyed by Secret Invasion as just incredibly bored by it and completely and utterly perplexed as to why they spent $200 million on what was effectively a complete and utter waste of time. You can look at my reviews for that show there on my other channel, I believe, which is just Defub21. I might, if I can figure out how to move them over here at some point, I might well do that. But as a show, it was, or maybe they're on this channel. I can't remember. I'll have to again. I'll have to check after I've recorded this. But that show was a complete waste of time, a complete waste of money. It was neither a suspenseful thriller, which I think just because of the kind of creative restrictions of Disney Plus, or that Disney Plus imposes, you can't really do a proper slash effective thriller on Disney Plus, nor was it an action spectacle either. And so, again, it was just, the whole purpose, it seems to be, of Secret Invasion was to waste one of the best storylines from the comics on what was effectively filler intended to, occupy 6 weeks of streaming episodes until Ahsoka came along, and was a complete and utter waste of money, and I don't think it should ever have been made. The problem the problem with this show, and again, it has some of the core problems that Secret Invasion had, in that this is a live action show. There are episodes in it that are inappropriately short for a live action show that's not a sitcom. It is obviously much better production value overall. The CGI effects are fine to great for a streaming show. The volume has been used better here than it has been in earlier MCU slash Star Wars shows. So in terms of the kind of quality of the quote unquote production, I think it may be not perfect, and maybe could be better for a big budget appointment viewing television show that everyone's got to watch every new episode the moment they come out. But it's certainly much better than Secret Invasion. But it suffers from the same problem that Secret Invasion does, and the same problem that the other recent Star Wars shows. In other words, the recent season 3 The Mandalorian, the Book of Boba Fett, Obi-Wan Kenobi, that they all suffer from, which is that the writing is nowhere near good enough, both in terms of the overall story and plot threads and how they're structured throughout the show, A, and B, the dialogue is just, in both quality and quantity, it's just not there where it needs to be. The same is, the same is true of the other recent Star Wars shows. It's just that this one, I think, is overall better made. Season 3, The Mandalorian, was a disorganized mess. The Book of Boba Fett had similar to, space Vespas and so on. And Obi-Wan Kenobi was, in terms of how it was shot, choreographed, directed, in my view, was a train wreck. The director they assigned to direct the show uh, did not know what she was doing, or at least needed, at least some time as an assistant director making that kind of content to learn how to do it properly. They should not have they should absolutely have not put her in charge of directing the return of Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi, uh, in charge of it. And there were other elements as well that were terribly written. The Reva character in Obi-Wan Kenobi is just a disaster from beginning to end. I believe the actress who played that role, whose again name I forget, was is quite capable, but she was just given, very not the role wasn't good, the writing wasn't good, the direction wasn't good, the choreographing and the cinematography for the action, particularly the lightsaber sequences, was bad. I mean, the list goes on there. Like, I don't want to be repeating myself over and over on this kind of autopsy, the previous most recent Star Wars shows or MCU shows, but the quality just hasn't been there. And while it is true that Ahsoka is better than those shows, it is better than those shows in the sense that it's simply not the shambolic mess that Obi-Wan Kenobi, Book of Boba Fett, and season three of the Mandalorian were. In that regard, it is an improvement, but it's an 8-episode run. Some of the episodes are again unnecessarily short. You take out trailers, take out the previously on sequence at the beginning. These are episodes that are less than half an hour long. It's 8 episodes over 8 weeks. At least maybe the first 2 episodes of Ahsoka were put out at the same time. I can't remember at this point, and I've got things to do, so I've got to get this review done and get back to my other things I've got to do in the real world. So I'm a bit short on time, and therefore can't do any research to check any of the stuff up to verify. But it's been assume 6 to 8 weeks of where very little has happened. All things considered, there are, you have a situation where you get multiple episodes where effectively the story moves along at a glacial pace, and you again go 2 episodes, some cases more, between one major plot point happening and then another. And you also have an entire plot thread, the one with Hera Syndulla, that was a complete waste of time, and I even say so even more now, is a complete waste of time. They could have had Mary Elizabeth Winstead popping up in a place here or there, during the run of who's playing Hera Syndulla, during the run of the show, including in the last episode here, where she's in at the beginning after her main kind of story thread has basically come to an end, where again, spoiler warning, she meets the Ezra Bridger return after he's returned from this other galaxy on his own, sans Ahsoka and Sabine. And quite frankly, that quick sequence there, and maybe a couple of other quick sequences where she, rings Ahsoka to let her know something has happened, and so on, would have been a much more efficient use of the character. Instead, we've had her, running through much of the show with a main storyline that goes nowhere, is ended, I think, in a very amateurish, member-berry type of way that has no real kind of consequences for the rest of the show this season run, or for seasons of the show going into the future. And there's just no reason. There's just no reason for it to, for that story thread to be there. It's a waste of time. It's on the show. It's a waste of space on the page, and it could have been much more effectively used, just concentrating on kind of the Ahsoka Sabine relationship, and working from there. I think it would have been a stronger show. And some of the more kind of genuinely stupid parts of the overall story are again, and the plot of the show running through the entire season, are directly to do with that story thread, and it's completely and utterly superfluous. and it's kind of like almost like Jar Jar Binks in the Phantom Menace. There are apparently fan edits of the Phantom Menace out there where they haven't got rid of Jar Jar Binks. They've just cut down his time in the movie quite dramatically, and apparently it helps the movie quite a bit. It's much better quality film as a result of this. And I think this is a case here. This was time on screen and money spent that could have been much better allocated to a kind of a more narrow primary cast of just Sabine Wren and Ahsoka, with Hera turning up from time to time, for a quick sequence here or there to give some exposition or some new information, and then to move the story along, and that will be it. And instead, again, this has been the primary core problem of the show. Not enough dialogue. The dialogue that is there isn't good enough. There's not enough time spent on any one individual character, which is a huge problem because a large chunk of the hardcore Star Wars audience, let alone the kind of normie Star Wars audience, never watched Rebels or the Clone Wars animated show and don't know who these three women are. And yes, Ahsoka has been in not Clone Wars. She's been in The Mandalorian, but and she had there were cool sequences of her in the episode she was in, but this was as her as kind of a side character to the main lead, which is again Din Djarin, and for the character to stand on her own, the strategic objective of this show should have been to introduce Ahsoka to that normie, don't know who she is audience, and that hardcore audience who either know nothing about her or maybe know who she is but didn't watch the animated shows, and to get them personally invested in her as a character and as a person to move forward with her into the future. And it's completely failed to do that because of the poor quality of the storytelling overall, the poor quality of the dialogue, the fact that there's so comparatively little dialogue, the fact that the story is broken up between three female characters. Again, the Hera Syndulla storyline was completely surplus, didn't need to be there, could have been reallocated again to Ahsoka and to Sabine, and that could have helped strengthen those two characters in terms of a lot more dialogue, a lot more time on screen, quite a bit. You've then also, of course, got a lot of time where you're on screen looking at the baddies and what they're doing, and that's taking up time. And again, it should be there, obviously, but the combination of the very short run of some of the episodes, wasting a huge amount of time on a completely unnecessary and surplus to requirements plot line with Hera, has meant that if you weren't someone who watched the animated Clone Wars show and the animated Rebels show, and therefore weren't vested personally or emotionally in either Ahsoka or Sabine Wren, this show, you will not care about these two characters and be personally invested by them by the end of this show's run. And we assume that this show will have multiple seasons, so we'll assume this is season 1. And so season 1 has failed in its mission to get the majority of the potential audience who'd be watching this personally invested in Ahsoka, principally, but also in Sabine Wren. And apparently this is proven out by the ratings. There's a delay, as it were, between the show's airing and us actually getting the ratings. And apparently the ratings for this show fell off a cliff after, I think it was the first episode, maybe it was the first 2 episodes if they were released at the same time. I think they were, but don't quote me on that. And interest, probably from that kind of normie to kind of hardcore audience who didn't watch the animated shows, fell off a cliff. They stopped watching, and the ratings have imploded. And they've imploded because the first 2 episodes, they do not catch the audience intent, interest / attention. They did not get the audience in a position where they want to find out what's going to happen next, which is exactly what the first 3 episodes that were released together last week for Gen V, which is the offshoot of The Boys. I've reviewed those 3 episodes on my channel, so take a look at those if you're interested in that show and haven't watched it. Although actually, yes, there might be spoilers in those, so you might want to watch the show first. I highly recommend watching the first 3 episodes of Gen V. But Gen V is so much better written than this. Which isn't to say that it's an outstandingly perfectly written show, but just the standard here, just in terms of the writing, in terms of the overall story, the dialogue, the lack of dialogue, it's just not good enough. And the season has completely failed to get a non-animated series fan personally invested in the characters, and it has therefore seen its ratings fall off a cliff. And as the next couple of weeks come by, because we only got the ratings for, I think, the second week or the third week maybe that the show that has been streaming, so we don't know how terrible the ratings are going to get. Now, it's possible that with all 8 episodes out, that you will get people who will, say, okay, Ahsoka's out in totality, I'm just going to binge the show over a weekend, and that might push up the ratings quite a bit. And fingers crossed for the people involved in this that that's exactly what happened. But I think that is unlikely, or that the bump will not be anywhere near great enough or sustained enough from people binging the entire show to make up for, I think, what is a ratings failure, maybe even out and out disaster, depending if the ratings are stable from here on out, based on the ratings that are information that's now coming out, or if they're actually getting worse. We'll have to wait and see. But in terms of this episode itself, so far, in my view, the 2 most successful seasons of Star Wars shows on Disney Plus have been season 1 and season 2 of The Mandalorian. Season 1's ending, in my view, is pretty damn good. I mean, they're sent into Din Djarin is sent in to kill or capture this target, only to find out that the target is spoiler warning, Baby Yoda, aka Grogu, which is so completely out of left field. It took me completely by surprise. I mean, credit to the people in charge of that show. And they really did, that's, you surprised me there, you impressed me there, very good. I wasn't as fond at all of the ending of season 2, which I thought season 2 was overall was a bit weaker. But the ending of season 2 was, well, to put it very succinctly, a certain Luke Skywalker turns up to save the day. And again, for me, that was too much fan service, too much member berries. I'm going to roll my eyes over it. But the reaction from the fan base was kind of overwhelmingly, including the normies, was overwhelmingly positive. So, it worked, at least once. And then, from then on, it's been a very kind of sustained decline. You've had Book of Boba Fett, which does basically have 2 Mandalorian episodes in it, which are pretty damn good. But the rest of the show is, all over the place, and I think damaged the Boba Fett character quite a bit. And you then, after that, you've got, I can't remember the exact chronology. You've then got Obi-Wan Kenobi. You've then got Mandalorian season 3. And I still think Obi-Wan Kenobi is the low point because it was just so poorly made. But season 3 of The Mandalorian is, again, it's worse than this in terms of the storytelling. In my view, it's a disorganized mess. A lot of the stuff in it is frankly doesn't make any sense or is stupid, and they're ignoring parts of it that I think are cameos from certain actors that again, Jack Black and Lizzo, that at the time I was kind of, because I read this episode, I was all right. but it was kind of in retrospect, it kind of broke the suspension of disbelief and shouldn't have been there in their particular episode. I think that's time and money that could have been spent elsewhere on main story threads. In relation to this season final is not as good as the season final of season one of The Mandalorian. I think most of the fan base will view it as not being as good as the end of season 2, The Mandalorian. Maybe better than Obi-Wan Kenobi, because Obi-Wan Kenobi's season, the whole show was so bad, and Book of Boba Fett probably would be viewed as almost as comparable or maybe better than. But it's the show is an improvement, again, as I keep saying, over what's come over the last, say, 2 years, maybe 2 years and a bit at this stage. But what came back over the last couple of years was just so bad that it was just so bad that anything could be, if it was just even slightly better put together from a writing standpoint, a storytelling standpoint, would be better than what we saw out of season 3 of Mandalorian, Book of Boba Fett, and particularly Obi-Wan Kenobi. But it's still, it's not even up to the standard of the prequel trilogy, let alone the original trilogy in terms of the quality, the production quality. In technical terms, yeah, it's better because the technology is more advanced. But the action sequences, again, the lightsaber stuff is the actor is playing Ezra Bridger, whose again name I forget, he gets him, again, spoiler warning, he builds himself a completely new lightsaber, and he does he seems, he's nice, and he's faster than the two actresses are with it. But again, none of them are up to the standard you saw in terms of use of a lightsaber in the prequel trilogy, or necessarily even the original trilogy itself. And why I could believe maybe there was issues with Rosario Dawson physically not being able to wield a lightsaber, the kind of speed necessary to be kind of a match for Ewan McGregor and what is his name again? I can never remember it. Hayden Christensen, yes, the actor who plays Anakin, both in the prequel trilogy and in this show. I can understand, maybe she's got some physical issues that prevent her from wielding it with the kind of proficiency that those two actors did with the training that they've received in the prequel trilogy. But and that Hayden Christensen clearly shows himself still capable of in this. The problem is that now you've got 3 lightsaber wielders, the actress playing Sabine Wren and the actor playing Ezra Bridger, and theirs is not up to the same standard either. Now, you don't really see them in serious lightsaber duels. Certainly not the Ezra Bridger in a lightsaber duel in this episode. But you do see kind of a must lightsaber duel fight between Ahsoka and I've forgotten the name both of the actress and the character. Grand Admiral Thrawn's special friend, who did all this hard work to rescue him, and then gets left behind and gets killed by Ahsoka after she gets magic witch powers and a magic witch sword to even the odds between herself and Ahsoka. But what is the name of that character? Anyway, I don't have the time to go check it, unfortunately. So the problems remain though. You've now got 3 lightsaber wielders in the show in this episode, with 4 lightsabers between them, 2 white, 1 green, and 1 blue, and we're still not seeing anywhere near the kind of lightsaber kind of martial arts skill that was seen out of Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor in the first or in the prequel trilogies, Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. And you're also not seeing what clearly Hayden Christensen still knows what he's doing. He had to slow himself down because of Rosario Dawson not being able to keep up with him, but he clearly still has the skills. And yet, again, and this, what is a much more Jedi-centric show than anything we've seen from the streaming shows to date, this just isn't. I mean, this just isn't. It isn't where the standard isn't there. We know what the standard is. It's not there for the lightsaber fighting. The stormtroopers are still unnecessarily ineffective. They certainly gave the impression to me of being much more dangerous in the original trilogy than they are portrayed here. And have been through most of the streaming shows, which I think has been bad for the streaming shows because it eliminates them as a sense of threat for the characters in the various Star Wars streaming shows if they just knocked over like 10 pins every time they turn up, and they seem to behave in quite stupid ways, like coming out into the open en masse and blasting away at the good guys where they then go get picked off by the good guys, when instead they could have stayed in cover and provided the themselves a cover, and therefore a much more difficult kind of opponent or opposition for the characters you're supposed to be rooting for. And this again continues to be a problem. Yeah, some of them get zombified in this episode, but and that of course adds a bit of a wrinkle. But again, it's Disney Plus, so they can't really take advantage of that in any particular kind of gory way. We do get a decapitation in this episode, but again, it's shot in a way where the decapitated zombie is cleverly shot, effectively gets the neck slice, but does so in a way that it falls backwards behind an obstacle, like an obelisk, that obscures its head separating from its body, and then the body falls over headless, but that's covered up by this obelisk thing, and then you see the head rolling past the obelisk and back into the view of the camera, and by extension the audience. Very PG-12 at best, but it again, it is what it is. But it underlines the kind of fact that they really can't do lightsabers to the standard they should be able to, in terms of exactly how dangerous and how lethal that they are in fact are. And it's in terms of the story itself, this is the particular thing that annoys me the most about this episode. Is the best thing in the show by far overall in terms of the cast has been Ray Stevenson. Ray Stevenson has did a great job, and he has sadly passed away, I think, on set of the last movie he's in. I don't know if it was completed. It wasn't on set. He was in a hotel, but he was working on a movie when he died. Don't know what he died of, but he did die. And I was hoping that we would get a resolution to Baylan Skoll's Skulls or Scrolls, or whatever how you pronounce it, story arc with him playing the character this season. But unfortunately, that has not happened. In other words, again, with the Baylan Skoll character, it's too little story, too little dialogue spread over too many weeks, with episodes that are too short, and so too little happens overall from one episode to the next. And so it's been a kind of a major story thread running through this, and particularly as a major one because by far the standout member of the cast has been Ray Stevenson. He's done incredible work with very, very little credit where credit is due. Is that we don't find out, why he was attracted to this planet in the first place, whatever was calling to him. We don't find out. We get a sequence at the end where he's walking along on foot and walks onto this arm of this giant kind of statue carved into the rock, and with another statue of other person next to it. Think like really giant in scale. And then he's looking off and something glinting in the distance on the top of a mountain. And that's basically the last we see of him. And so you know y- you can't have overriding story arcs that you can't well you absolutely can have overriding story arcs running from the very first episode of a show all the way to the season final. You see that in Game of Thrones, although again the last season of Game of Thrones is an utter train wreck. Babylon 5 is an excellent early kind of sci-fi example of this, and it's the main kind of advantage of serialized storytelling. But you can't have a situation where almost every story arc of a show, or virtually every last one of them, either goes nowhere and is of no use. The Sabine, not the Sabine Wren, the Harrison Dulles story thread goes nowhere, has a meaningless ending with no real consequences, and then have another one with, again, the most standout cast member in the show, Balin Skull, played by Ray Stevenson. That comes to a kind of a sparkly bit in the distance scene, like long distance. Like this is a distance where there's no way he's going to be able to walk there on foot without finding himself multiple sources of food along the way, because he'll starve to death before he can get there. The same thing happens with, I think it's Shin Hati, his apprentice, who I thought would be getting on, got on her wolf on the last episode, and I thought was running back to Thrawn, but instead ends up with which is particularly because what Skull says is tells her to go off in the previous episode to join the new empire, to take her her place alongside Thrawn. That doesn't happen. She stays on the planet and ends up apparently meeting up with those raiders you've seen earlier on. So who knows what's going to happen with her. Ahsoka and Sabine are stuck on the planet, although their Jedi shuttle is up and running order. My guess is that we'll be looking at, if there is another season of this, them finding Purgles and making their way back that way, unless at some point Ezra Bridger steals that giant hyperspace ring and uses it to go rescue them. I mean, who knows? Who knows if there will be another season of this show, because it's just been such a train wreck. If they do, they're going to I'm sorry, either Dave Filoni, we again, because there's so much kind of rumor and innuendo out there about the state of Lucasfilm, what's going on behind the scenes, lots of infighting, a lot of creative decisions that are being made by Disney and by people Disney may have brought in, that the kind of OG kind of George Lucas loyalists at Lucasfilm don't like but can't do anything about. There's a lot of kind of excuses up there, in the air, justifications and so on. So who knows? Who genuinely knows what's going on? What's going on with Disney and what's going on at Lucasfilm? But this isn't anywhere. This isn't good enough. It's simply not good enough. It's better than the direct to very mediocre, very mediocre, well, not even mediocre, genuinely bad stuff we've seen over the last kind of 2 years and a bit in terms of Star Wars content and even MCU content. But it's nowhere near good enough. Dave Filoni might be able to kind of be the executive producer on the next season, if there is a next season, and he may even be able to be a writer on the next season as well. But he cannot be allowed to write the next season, if there is one, on his own. There were the Harrison Dulles thing was a huge mistake. The fact that there's not, as I've said already, there's just not enough story and not enough plot points happening over too many episodes that are spread out over too many weeks. It makes the show slow. It makes it a kind of a slog to get through, to watch. It means the episodes that are really short, like literally there are at least 2 of them that are less than half an hour long, or barely half an hour long when you take into account the credits at the end and the previously on sequences at the beginning. There is no justification for any live action show that's supposed to be big budget appointment television, that's not a sitcom, to have such a short running time on individual episodes. And there are multiple kind of episodes like that in Secret Invasion. I think there's only 2 of them, maybe it's 3 off the top of my head, in Ahsoka. Whether that's because of the writing, that's bad writing, those episodes should have been amalgamated. If it's because of budgetary constraints, again, Disney has no excuse. They're one of the biggest media companies out there. This is a show that is supposed to be appointment television. It's supposed to be competing with appointment television shows from HBO, streaming shows from HBO slash what was HBO Max, and from obviously the big juggernaut in the space, Netflix. And they're clearly writing them very badly. They're either not willing to spend the money to have 8 episodes that are 50 minutes, 45 minutes a piece each. So you've got these 2 ridiculously short episodes that shouldn't be there, that artificially prolong the run of the show and make it even slower. There's even less going on. And whether if it's either that or creative / writing decisions. But these, again, there's just so little happens, all things considered, over the total run of the show. Certain things just don't make sense. There's so little dialogue, and the dialogue is just not good enough. In this again, very little happens in this episode. Yeah, basically Thrawn gets back to the Star Wars galaxy that we know and used to love, as does Ezra, who again meets up with Hera. But Sabine and Ahsoka are trapped back in the old galaxy, as is Shin Hati, as is Baylan Skoll. What happens to them? What happens to the if there is another season to these characters? If there is another season, if the show doesn't get cancelled, I don't know. But there's if there was at least one serious payoff on one of the story threads, which doesn't mean that one of these stories threads would be completed forever, and in this first season, but at least one of the story threads had a major, not necessarily kind of being completely completed, but if you break it down into sections, as it were, the first section, the story thread in the first season, then the second section, the same story thread in the second and third, and so on. If there was some sort of major turning point or cliffhanger in one of the main story threads, maybe that would have helped it. But that, again, it just isn't there. It looks good, could be better. Too much use of the volume when they could have done location shooting instead. We don't know what's in those kind of caskets that are now in Thrawn's Star Destroyer. You see Thrawn kind of getting to Dathomir in the episode after he gets back to the main Star Wars galaxy. One assumes they're full of witches of Dathomir or zombies or something or another. And again, that'll be explored in a second season, if there is a second season. But outside of that, sounding like a broken record again. It's just not there. The show is too long. The 2 shorter episodes should have been split, with half of one episode going to the previous longer episode and the other part going to the next shorter episode to lengthen it out. It's, I don't know if I'm not going to do a video on what I think they could have changed. The one thing that would have hugely improved the quality of the show is that they should have, the World Between Worlds, fan service for those who know what it is. The vast bulk of the hardcore and normie audience does not know what the World Between Worlds is. That should not have been there. You could have had sequences running through the entirety of the season where Ahsoka is thinking back to her younger days, thinking about Anakin, maybe going to sleep and dreaming about him. And you could have had multiple Clone Wars sequences, a lot more than you did get in that one episode, running throughout it. And I think that would have helped the show immensely. It would have cost money, but again, in the greater context of the Star Wars IP, they The Last Jedi did an awful lot of damage. I didn't bother to see the final movie of the sequel trilogy. Uh, I the quality of the content since then, again, Obi-Wan did more damage than rather than helping to undo the damage that was done by Disney Lucasfilm to the IP. Season 3 of The Mandalorian did not help. Book of Boba Fett hurt it again. And if this was planned out to be a multi-season show, the whole kind of pardon me, as I've already said already, the whole base objective of this season should have been to get those who don't know who Ahsoka is personally kind of emotionally invested in the character, or to understand and know who she is, and get them personally emotionally invested in the character, and to maybe a lesser degree Sabine Wren as well. And they completely failed to do that. They completely failed to do that. If there had been dream sequences or her looking off into the distance and remembering, like you saw in kind of those sequences in Obi-Wan Kenobi involving Anakin and in the Jedi Temple, that could have worked. It would have improved the quality of the show quite a bit. It would have allowed the normie audience who don't know who Ahsoka is at all, and the hardcore audience who might have an understanding of who Ahsoka is but didn't watch the Clone Wars animated show or Rebels, to get a better feel for the character and what she's been through and why she is the way she is, now, and to understand her and again get emotionally invested in the character, which of course for the audience will then hugely up the stakes in terms of the overall run of the show and its story, because what's going to happen to Ahsoka and so on. But we don't get any of that. We don't get any of that at all. And we get one, world between worlds sequence where she's talking with Anakin again, which is, I liked it, but because again, I like the Clone Wars animated show, but it could be classified as fan service, and there's nowhere near enough of it and the writing isn't good enough to to really help with the normie audience and the hardcore audience that didn't watch the animated shows. And at the end, you get it here again. You get at the end of the episode, you get this time Force Ghost Anakin looking on from the distance at her and Ahsoka and Sabine. And for me, this is just more. And again, you see him turning up, a recording of him turning up in when Ahsoka is training, practicing on her ship in, I think it's the previous episode. And it's just Hayden Christensen, I thought, did a great job. And in the sequences he's in the World Between Worlds, he could have been much more effectively utilized if there'd been a whole stream again of her remembering back to the Clone Wars sequences involving her in a relationship with Anakin, running throughout the entirety of the show. And that could have easily been done in terms of a space on the page and time on the screen, because the Hera Syndulla storyline was a complete waste of time. Could have been deleted entirely, with Hera turning up in a couple of places to make a cameo and say hi, and you could have used that time and that budget, that funding, to just do more Clone Wars sequences instead. And again, Disney does not appear to be willing. It seems to be, again, in the case of Secret Invasion, spent an obscene amount of money for nothing. I don't know where their budgetary control is on this. Maybe they shot, my guess is that they shot multiple different scenes and sequences in large numbers for Secret Invasion and tried to mix and match them, and just got a hodgepodge disorganized mess and ended up spending way too much money. But in the case of this show, again, you're trying to rebuild the brand, the IP. You're trying to get the audience who don't know who Ahsoka is to understand who she is and how she's ended up the way she is, and why she's made the decision she's made, both on and off screen. And you need to get them personally and emotionally invested in the character. They completely failed to do that, and having kind of a time jump situation where you see a young Ahsoka, who's the actress who played her, who again, the name I can't remember, did a great job. You could have had dream sequences / kind of her thinking to herself and remembering back to the Clone Wars and various kind of points in the Clone Wars animated series that could have been transferred to live action, uh, and had those, decent sequences, decent production values, and had them running, in every episode of the show where you see Ahsoka. And that would have certainly increased the spectacle quotient for the show overall. It would have given Hayden Christensen an awful lot more time on screen, because he clearly he did a better job here than he did throughout his entirety of Attack of the Clones, and particularly Revenge of the Sith. And I think that's not because necessarily he's grown by as an actor, although he certainly would have got more experience now than he did 20 years ago, or more than 20, well, whenever Attack of the Clones came out. But he's got more to work here. The dialogue, from my point of view, the Jedi are evil. His he's, in his defense, he just didn't have much to work with, quite frankly, over not much to work with at all over over his Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. And if you had him in kind of in memory sequences / dream sequences, with her young Ahsoka during the Clone Wars, at various points during the Clone Wars, which were, important to Ahsoka's development as a character, and even his development, or Anakin's development as a character, it could have helped things immensely, like really immensely. But again, they didn't do it. They failed to strengthen the position of the IP because the storytelling, the writing overall is too poor, too weak. They failed to get the audience who didn't watch the animated shows vested emotionally in the character of Ahsoka. They failed completely with the Hera Syndulla storyline, waste of time, space on the page, and money. There's nothing about this episode that gets me enthused about, what's going to happen next. And if that's the case with someone who did like the animated shows and did watch them, I can only imagine what the normie audience... Well, we know what the normie audience and the kind of non-animated show hardcore fan base audience's reaction has been, because apparently the ratings have fallen off a cliff. And, it's just... And it's not just like, as I said, it's not just a Lucasfilm problem, it's a Disney Plus problem. The shows we've been seeing, the writing isn't there. Very little happens over weeks and weeks and weeks, making the shows a boring slog. Apparently there are some people who've got the right connections, have already been given kind of screeners for Loki, which follows on. Is it from next week? I'm not sure, a week or two from now. And apparently the show is much better written, much better made than this is, if you believe those reviews. And I'll certainly be reviewing it when it comes out. But as it currently stands, the quality control on Disney Plus is nowhere near where it needs to be on the writing. They're not willing to spend the money to actually, to pull off kind of action Star Wars well. You need people who can do the lightsaber battles properly, duels properly, physically able to do it, have been trained to the minimum standard required to be able to pull off, because the standard is effectively, the minimum is the original trilogy lightsaber stuff, and better yet, the Revenge of the Sith, Attack of the Clones level of lightsaber dueling. And we're not seeing that here. The storytelling isn't there. They failed to get the people who are still watching invested in the character, who weren't already invested in Ahsoka. They failed to give a, not even necessarily a successful conclusion to the Bale and Skull storyline, but even kind of they failed to give the Bale and Skull character a major, well, even just a major plot point in a story thread at the end. All you see is him walking onto... Now, I'm sure there's Again, I'm sure there's kind of fans out there who know their lore, who may have looked at those two giant statues of which he's standing on one of and said, oh my god, I know who these people are. But I don't. The normies certainly don't. A good chunk of the hardcore fan base certainly didn't watch the animated shows, don't. And, you know, and have him looking off into the distance, this glinting thing at the top of a mountain far, far away. That's not enough. But it's not enough, particularly when you take into account that, you know, the rest of the show. Too long, too little going on, too little dialogue, too poorly written. And, you know, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Again, if Disney really wants to compete in the streaming space long term, they need to, you know, either fire the writers or certainly don't allow a single person to write an entire show on their own. And, you know, the single thing they could probably have done, considering that the script is the way it is they could have shortened it. If they took those 2 short episodes and turned it into one longer episode, that'd be like 50 minutes, an hour long, and reduced it from a 6-episode run to from an 8-episode run to a 6-episode run, that might have made the show feel faster, at least a bit faster, and would have maybe improved the kind of overall experience or impression of it that I have, and that I think most people out there will have. But as it is, for the amount of actual story and plot points that are in it, it's too long, too little happens, there's too little dialogue, the dialogue isn't good enough, and I've already stated, it's any of the what I would consider the minimum objectives it needed to, you know, at least try for or achieve. It has failed to do so. So it's better than what's come before, but it's not in any way, shape, or form going to meaningfully change the direction of the IP, which is that it is in the basement, to put it mildly. Star Wars is at the moment, well, the basement. Well, that's a polite way of putting it. And it doesn't in any way, shape, or form meaningfully begin the process of rebuilding the IP, rebuilding the interest in the IP, rebuilding the excitement for the IP. It's not event content anymore. Star Wars isn't. And if this is the best that Disney can do, with the odd show or a piece of content that's even worse, then Star Wars is not going back to its former heights anytime soon. Anyway, this is me rambling on for way too long, I think. At this point, I may cut this review down a bit in the edit. I may not, depending on the time I have and everything else. But let me know what you think in the comments. If you, for some strange reason, are not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. Please like, because the algorithm likes it. And again, please comment in the comments, because the algorithm likes that as well. I genuinely want your opinions on views on this, and on your views on the show, and let me know what you think of this video, this review, and give me pointers and suggestions in the comments. They will be taken on gratefully. This is DafubFilm&TV signing off. Toodaloo.